Africa just formed an alliance that controls 68% of the world's cobalt, 45% of its gold, and the fastest growing consumer market on Earth.
The combined GDP, over $2 trillion. Yet when this pact was signed 3 months ago, it got less media coverage than a celebrity breakup.
Major powers are quietly panicking because what these nations are planning changes everything we thought we knew about global power. The African Continental Free Trade Area. That's the official name. But what's happening behind that boring title is anything but ordinary. On paper, it's a trade agreement. 54 African nations signed up to remove trade barriers and create a single market. Sounds simple. But 7 countries within this larger framework just formed an inner circle. A core alliance that operates with different rules. Democratic Republic of Congo, South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, Kenya, Ethiopia, Ghana. These 7 nations didn't just shake hands and promise to play nice. They created something called the Strategic Resource Coalition. And this is where things get interesting, because unlike the broader trade deal, this inner group made 3 specific commitments. First, they would coordinate all resource exports as a unified bloc. Second, they would prioritize trade with each other before selling to outside nations. Third, and this is the critical part, they would collectively negotiate with foreign powers instead of individually. That last point is what has boardrooms in Washington, Brussels, and Beijing going silent during meetings. For the first time in modern history, African nations that control the majority of critical minerals aren't competing against each other. They're working together. And they're doing it quietly. No big announcement. No flashy summit with world leaders posing for photos. Just a series of bilateral agreements signed over 6 months, each one building on the last. Most media outlets reported these as separate events, individual trade deals between friendly nations. But connect the dots and you see the pattern, a coordinated strategy, one that started forming years ago. And the reason why becomes clear when you look at what happened in 2019. A lithium mine in the Democratic Republic of Congo. A Chinese company and a Canadian firm were bidding against each other for mining rights. The price kept climbing, higher and higher. Congo needed the money. Their negotiating team was ready to sign with whoever paid more. Then something unexpected happened. The Chinese company called the Canadian firm. Behind closed doors, they agreed to split the mine. They'd work together instead of competing. Then they went back to Congo with a new offer, lower than either original bid. Congo had no choice but to accept. This happened again in Zambia with copper, in Ghana with gold, in South Africa with platinum. Major powers weren't competing anymore. They were coordinating, and African nations were losing billions in potential revenue. One person noticed the pattern, Dr. Amara Okafor, an economist working for the African Union. She wrote a report that most people ignored. The title? The Coordination Problem. How resource competition benefits buyers, not sellers. Her conclusion was simple but radical. As long as African nations negotiated separately, they'd always lose. The buyers held all the power because they could play countries against each other. Her solution? African nations needed to do exactly what the buyers were doing. Coordinate. The report circulated quietly among finance ministers. No public discussion, no media coverage. But within 18 months, something shifted. Nigeria's president had a private meeting with Congo's leader. Then South Africa's cabinet held closed sessions about resource policy. Egypt started talking to Kenya about infrastructure projects that didn't make sense on the surface. Separately, these looked like random diplomatic events. Together, they were the foundation of something much bigger. But there was still one major problem they needed to solve. First, each nation brought something different to the table, and that's exactly why this alliance works. The Democratic Republic of Congo controls the cobalt, over 70% of the world's supply. Every electric car battery, every smartphone, every laptop needs it. Without Congo, the green energy revolution stops cold. South Africa brings the infrastructure, the most developed financial system on the continent, the ports, the railways, the institutional knowledge of how to negotiate with major powers. Nigeria has the population, over 220 million people, the largest economy in Africa, and oil reserves that still matter despite the push for renewable energy. Egypt controls the Suez Canal, one of the most important trade routes on Earth. About 12% of global trade passes through it. That's leverage money can't buy. Kenya offers the strategic location, access to East African markets, a growing tech sector that rivals anything in Europe, the gateway to a region with 400 million consumers. Ethiopia provides the manufacturing potential, low labor costs, a government actively building industrial zones, and the fastest-growing economy in the region over the past decade. Ghana rounds out the group with stable governance, democratic institutions that foreign investors trust, gold reserves, and a history of successfully managing resource wealth. Alone, each country had leverage. Together, they became something else entirely. But here's what makes this different from previous attempts at African unity. They're not trying to merge into one entity. They're not creating a shared currency or a political union. Those approaches failed before. Instead, they're keeping their independence while coordinating on one specific thing: resources. That narrow focus is what makes it achievable. And the numbers behind what they control? That's where the real power becomes obvious. Add up what these 7 nations control, and the picture becomes clear. 68% of the world's cobalt, 45% of global gold reserves, 85% of platinum group metals, 30% of diamonds, significant portions of copper, uranium, chromium, and manganese. But raw materials are only part of the equation. They also control 600 million people. That's a consumer market larger than the European Union. And unlike aging populations in the West, the average age across these nations is 19 years old. Young populations mean workers, consumers, economic growth potential that compounds over decades. The combined GDP hits $2.1 trillion. That's larger than India's economy in 2010. And growth rates are projected between 4% and 6% annually. Now here's where it gets strategic. The resources these nations control aren't just valuable. They're critical. There's no substitute for cobalt in current battery technology. Platinum is essential for hydrogen fuel cells. The minerals needed for computer chips, solar panels, and wind turbines all come from these countries. Which means anyone trying to build the technology of the future needs access to these resources. And for the first time, access requires negotiating with a unified bloc instead of individual nations. The shift in power is subtle but massive. Before, a company like Tesla could negotiate with Congo directly. If Congo asked for too much, Tesla could threaten to source from Australia or invest in synthetic alternatives. Congo would usually back down. Now Congo can say no, because they know South Africa, Ghana, and the others won't undercut them. The alliance holds, and this coordinated approach already produced results. 3 deals signed in the past year prove it. February 2024. A European consortium wanted to secure cobalt supplies for the next decade. They approached Congo with an offer. Standard terms: take it or leave it. Congo took it to the Strategic Resource Coalition instead. Within 2 weeks, the alliance sent back a counteroffer: higher prices, but also requirements. The consortium had to build processing facilities in Africa, not just extract raw materials. They had to train local workers, and they had to share technology. The Europeans balked. They threatened to look elsewhere. The alliance didn't blink, because they knew something the Europeans were still learning. There was no elsewhere, not at the scale needed. 3 months later, the consortium signed. New terms, African terms. That same playbook repeated in April with a Chinese electric vehicle manufacturer, and again in July with an American tech company. Each time the pattern held. Initial lowball offer, alliance coordinates, counter with higher prices plus development requirements. Foreign company threatens to walk. Alliance holds firm. Deal closes on African terms. But the strategy goes deeper than just negotiating prices. The alliance is also building cross-border infrastructure that reduces dependence on external parties. A railway connecting Congo's mines to South Africa's ports. A processing facility in Ghana that refines minerals from 3 different member nations. A technology hub in Kenya that serves the entire bloc. These projects do 2 things. First, they capture more value domestically instead of shipping raw materials abroad. Second, they make the alliance more interconnected, harder to break apart. Because the real threat isn't external pressure, it's internal division. History shows African unity movements fall apart when individual nations get better deals by going solo. So the alliance built in safeguards, mechanisms that make cooperation more profitable than competition. And those mechanisms are being tested right now. Because not everyone is happy about this shift in power, Western governments aren't directly opposing the alliance. At least not publicly. That would look like neocolonialism. Instead, they're using more subtle approaches. Trade agreements with individual nations that offer better terms than the alliance provides. Investment deals contingent on exclusive resource access. Development aid with strings attached. The goal? Peel off one or two members. Break the unified front. Ghana was the first target. Their economy depends heavily on gold exports. A major American investment firm offered $12 billion for exclusive mining rights. The catch? Ghana would need to negotiate separately, not through the alliance. The offer sat on the president's desk for 3 weeks. Then Ghana said no. Why? Because the alliance offered something more valuable than short-term cash. Long-term stability. When prices for gold fluctuate, the alliance helps Ghana weather the storms. When Ghana needs infrastructure investment, the other members provide it without political conditions. The network is worth more than any individual deal. But the pressure continues. China is trying similar tactics with Congo. European nations are courting Nigeria with massive infrastructure promises. So far, the alliance is holding. But there are cracks. Internal disagreements about how fast to push foreign partners. Debates about whether to allow some members to make side deals in certain sectors. Tension between larger nations like Nigeria and South Africa over who leads the coalition. These aren't small issues. They're the fundamental questions that broke previous African unity attempts. The difference this time? The incentives are aligned. Every member benefits more from cooperation than competition. The numbers prove it. Nations in the alliance saw export revenues increase by an average of 23% in the first year. Foreign investment is up. Infrastructure projects are moving faster than ever before. Success creates its own momentum. And that momentum is building towards something even bigger. Because this alliance isn't just about Africa. What happens in Africa doesn't stay in Africa. Not anymore. Not with these resources. The global push for electric vehicles requires 5 million tons of minerals that mostly come from these 7 nations. The semiconductor industry needs materials they control. The renewable energy transition depends on metals they mine, which means the alliance isn't just negotiating trade deals. They're influencing the pace of technological change worldwide. If they restrict cobalt exports, electric vehicle prices increase. If they demand higher prices for platinum, hydrogen fuel cell development slows. If they prioritize domestic processing, supply chains get rewritten. This puts them at the center of the biggest economic transformation in a century. And they know it. But there's a balance to maintain. Push too hard, and countries invest in alternatives. Synthetic materials, different battery technologies, new supply sources. Push too soft, and the alliance loses leverage. The moment foreign powers sense weakness, they'll exploit it. So the alliance is walking a careful line, increasing prices gradually, demanding concessions incrementally, building domestic capacity steadily. The approach is working, for now, but the real test hasn't come yet. What happens when a major power decides this alliance threatens their strategic interests? What happens when economic pressure turns into political pressure? Some analysts think the alliance will fracture under serious opposition. Others believe it's already too strong to break. The truth is probably somewhere in between. The alliance will face challenges, internal and external. Some members might leave, others might join. But the fundamental shift has already happened. African nations proved they can coordinate. They demonstrated that unity provides leverage. They showed the world that resource-rich countries don't have to accept whatever terms they're offered. And that precedent changes everything. Not just for Africa, but for every developing region watching closely. 3 scenarios could play out over the next decade. Scenario 1, the alliance strengthens. More African nations join the inner circle. The coordination expands beyond just resources to include manufacturing, technology, and finance. Africa becomes a unified economic bloc that rivals China, the EU, and the United States in global influence. Scenario 2. The alliance stabilizes at current levels. The 7 core nations maintain cooperation, but expansion stalls. They become a significant player in resource markets, but don't achieve broader economic integration. The world adapts to this new reality and a new equilibrium forms. Scenario 3. The alliance fragments. Internal divisions grow. 1 or 2 major members accept deals that benefit them individually, but weaken the group. The coordination breaks down. Things return to how they were before. Which scenario happens depends on factors already in motion. China's Belt and Road Initiative is building infrastructure across Africa. That creates dependence but also development. How the alliance navigates that relationship will be critical. Climate change is hitting Africa harder than most regions. Droughts, floods, food insecurity. If the alliance can't deliver economic benefits fast enough to address these challenges, public support will erode. Generational change in leadership matters too. The current presidents and ministers driving this alliance won't be in power forever. Will their successors maintain the vision, or will new leaders prioritize different goals? Technology could be the wild card. If battery technology shifts away from cobalt, the alliance loses its strongest leverage. But if demand for African minerals increases even more, their power grows. What's certain is this: the world is watching. Southeast Asian nations are studying the alliance model. South American countries are having similar conversations. The Middle East is paying attention, because if African nations can coordinate successfully, it proves a larger point. Resource-rich developing countries don't have to accept the terms set by industrialized powers. They can write their own rules. And that possibility threatens to reshape the entire global economic order. Which brings us to what's happening right now. 2 weeks ago, representatives from the 7 alliance nations met in Addis Ababa. No media coverage, no official announcement, just a quiet meeting that lasted 3 days. Sources inside the meeting say they discussed expansion, not adding more African nations, something different, inviting observer status to 3 countries outside Africa, countries that are also resource-rich and frustrated with current global trade dynamics, countries that have been watching the alliance's success with great interest. The names being mentioned: Bolivia, Indonesia, and Mongolia. If that happens, this stops being an African alliance. It becomes a global coalition of resource-rich nations coordinating against industrialized powers. The balance of economic power doesn't just shift, it flips. Major governments know about these discussions. They're scrambling to figure out how to respond. Offer concessions, apply pressure, try to infiltrate and divide. No one knows what decision the alliance will make. The next major meeting is scheduled for 6 weeks from now. Until then, everything is speculation. But here's what we do know. The framework is built. The precedent is set. The alliance-proved coordination works. Whether it stays contained to 7 African nations or expands into something that reshapes global economics entirely depends on decisions being made right now. Behind closed doors, away from cameras and headlines. And by the time the world realizes what happened, the new order might already be locked in. The question isn't whether change is coming. It's whether anyone outside these rooms will see it coming before it's too late.